They ignored my wedding because I married first. Now they're asking me for help. Reddit stories. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's video, we bring you a captivating Reddit story that will make you reflect on life, relationships, and the unexpected twists we all face. It's a story full of emotions and lessons that can inspire you to think differently about your own life. If you enjoy these types of stories, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing Reddit stories and insightful content. Stay tuned for an unforgettable experience. Growing up in a family where favoritism was the norm can have a lasting impact on one's self-esteem and sense of identity. Rebecca's experience with her parents and sister Mullen is a vivid example of how emotional manipulation, competition, and neglect can shape a person's life. While Mullen's life seemed to unfold like a storybook, full of success, accolades, and attention, Rebecca felt constantly sidelined despite her own achievements. This family dynamic caused deep emotional scars that Rebecca had to come to terms with in order to finally embrace her own path in life. From the moment Rebecca could remember, Mullen was the golden child of the family. No matter what Mullen did, it seemed like she was always at the top. Academically gifted, involved in every extracurricular activity, and later excelling in modeling and business, Mullen was the perfect reflection of what her parents expected from a daughter. She was admired not just by her parents but by the entire family and community. Her accomplishments were celebrated, and her portrait hung proudly on the wall. On the other hand, Rebecca, despite having her own achievements, was always compared to Mullen. Her degree in computer science and her respectable job as a mid-level software developer were overshadowed by her sister's seemingly flawless career. No matter how much Rebecca tried to impress her parents, it was never enough. It wasn't just the constant comparison of her accomplishments that hurt, but also the cruel remarks made about her appearance. Her mother regularly pointed out how Rebecca was not as slender or attractive as Mullen, and would suggest ways for Rebecca to improve her body, even enrolling her in workout classes that she didn't want to attend. This emotional neglect made Rebecca feel as though she would never be enough for her family. While Mullen's every success was celebrated with extravagant parties and family gatherings, Rebecca's achievements were met with indifference or, at best, muted acknowledgement. Despite all of this, Rebecca still sought her parents' approval well into her mid-20s, trying to fit into their ideal image of the perfect daughter. But eventually Rebecca realized that she could never meet their impossible standards. In her late 20s, Rebecca stopped trying to gain her parents' approval. She focused on building a life for herself on her own terms. She pursued her career, found friends who respected her for who she was, and started to embrace her own identity outside of her family's expectations. It was during this time that she met her future husband. Unlike her family, he appreciated her for her true qualities, her humor, her intelligence, and yes, even her body type. Their relationship was based on mutual respect, and he never made her feel as though she had to change to fit someone else's idea of perfection. When Rebecca got engaged, she hoped for the support of her family, but that's not what she received. Despite sending out invitations well in advance, her parents ignored the invitations and made no effort to attend the wedding. Rebecca's mother, instead of expressing joy or excitement about her daughter's engagement, suggested that she might want to improve her physical appearance before the wedding. Her father barely responded at all. Eventually, Rebecca learned that her parents had been speaking to Mullen, their beloved daughter, about how Rebecca's wedding wasn't the plan. They were disappointed that Rebecca had gotten married first, which was a stark contrast to how they had envisioned things unfolding. It became clear that her parents valued their perfect family image more than they valued Rebecca as an individual. They cared more about their idealized vision of success than they did about supporting their daughter. The absence of her parents at her wedding, especially during the father-daughter dance, was heartbreaking. But what hurt most was not the absence itself, it was the realization that her family, especially her parents, were too caught up in their own image to ever truly support her. After the wedding, Rebecca tried to confront her parents about their actions, but instead of offering any form of apology or taking responsibility, they blamed Rebecca for the rift. They claimed she was the one who had destroyed the family by not conforming to their expectations. It was then that Rebecca realized the truth. She had been raised in a family where love and validation were conditional, and she would never be able to compete with Mullen in their eyes. Despite the pain, Rebecca found solace in the fact that she had finally spoken her truth. She had spent years trying to win her parents' approval, but now she was free from that burden. She no longer needed their validation to feel good about herself. The most difficult part of this realization was coming to terms with the fact that her parents would never change. They would never acknowledge the harm they had caused. But that, Rebecca understood, was not her problem to solve. As time passed, Rebecca focused on building a life with her husband, one that was based on mutual respect, love, and happiness. She distanced herself from her parents and the toxic dynamics of her family, accepting that she would never receive the love and support she had always craved. The emotional toll of years of neglect and favoritism had shaped her into the person she was today, but she was no longer the child desperate for approval. She had found her own way, and that was enough. Rebecca's story serves as a poignant reminder that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to please people who will never be satisfied with who you are. It's about finding your own worth and letting go of the toxic relationships that hold you back. In the end, it's not about proving others wrong, it's about proving to yourself that you are enough, just as you are. In a world where family dynamics can often be complex and even toxic, Rebecca's journey highlights the emotional turmoil that can come from growing up in an environment where favoritism, manipulation, and an unyielding need for perfection overshadow true love and support. Her story exemplifies how, despite the success of a family or the lavish image they try to project, the reality of emotional neglect can leave deep scars, especially when it comes to sibling rivalry and the desire for approval from one's parents. Rebecca grew up in a family that revered perfection. From the start, her sister Mullen was positioned as the family's star. Tall, slim, and naturally gifted, Mullen was the one who could do no wrong. From childhood to adulthood, Mullen excelled in every possible way. She was always the center of attention at family gatherings, winning academic awards, dominating talent shows, and later becoming a successful model and businesswoman. Mullen's achievements were constantly praised and celebrated, and her pictures were displayed proudly around the house. On the other hand, Rebecca, despite her own accomplishments, was left in the shadows. She pursued a degree in computer science, which she was proud of, but this career path never seemed to hold the same weight in her parents' eyes as Mullen's modeling and business success. Throughout Rebecca's life, her parents, especially her mother, constantly compared her to Mullen, belittling her appearance and even enrolling her in workout classes she didn't want to attend. Her mother's comments about how Rebecca would only be as good as Mullen if she tried harder haunted Rebecca's self-esteem. Even when Rebecca achieved her own successes, it was never enough to gain her parents' pride or recognition. Instead, they consistently showered praise upon Mullen, pushing Rebecca to constantly strive to be something she wasn't. By the time Rebecca reached her mid-20s, she had learned to stop seeking her parents' approval. She came to terms with the fact that she would never be able to measure up to Mullen's standard of perfection. Instead, she focused on creating her own path. She forged friendships with people who appreciated her for who she was, not for what she could achieve. During this time, she met and fell in love with her now husband, who saw her for who she truly was. Unlike her parents, he valued her intellect, humor, and body type. Their relationship grew stronger as they supported each other, building a future together. However, when Rebecca got engaged, she hoped that her parents would finally offer some form of support. What she received, however, was more of the same neglect and lack of enthusiasm. Her parents' absence at her engagement party and wedding, despite having received invitations, spoke volumes. Her mother, instead of congratulating her, questioned whether she was sure about getting married and even suggested she might want to improve her physical condition before the wedding. Her father, too, seemed emotionally distant, barely responding to the news. It became clear that Rebecca's wedding had disrupted their carefully crafted image of the perfect family. It wasn't until after the wedding that Rebecca learned the full extent of her parents' actions. They had been speaking to Mullen, and it was revealed that their absence was due to the fact that Rebecca, their lesser daughter, had gotten married first. This was a stark violation of the family's narrative, where Mullen, the successful and perfect child, was supposed to be the first to marry. The revelation that her parents were more concerned about their ideal family image than celebrating her happiness was a hard pill to swallow. When Rebecca confronted her parents about their behavior, they denied any wrongdoing. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, they accused her of exaggerating and making everything about herself. They even went as far as to claim that Rebecca was trying to ruin Mullen's wedding, asserting that her decision to marry before Mullen was out of jealousy. It became clear that her parents were incapable of understanding her pain, and they refused to acknowledge the emotional damage they had caused her over the years. This conversation with her parents, although difficult, was a turning point for Rebecca. For the first time, she allowed herself to be completely honest with them. She admitted that she was envious, not of Mullen's success or her accomplishments, but of the unwavering love and support that Mullen had always received. Rebecca realized that she had never been able to compete with the image of perfection that her parents had created around Mullen. Her parents' refusal to acknowledge their favoritism, however, left Rebecca with no choice but to distance herself from them and embrace her own life, free from the burden of trying to win their approval. This breakthrough moment of speaking her truth and asserting her worth was liberating for Rebecca. She no longer felt the need to please her parents, and for the first time in her life, she was able to let go of the unrealistic expectations they had placed on her. She no longer cared about competing with Mullen or living up to their image of what a daughter should be. Instead, she focused on building a life with her husband, someone who loved and respected her for who she was. Mullen, however, wasn't done yet. When she reached out to Rebecca's husband, trying to manipulate him into pressuring Rebecca into conforming to her family's narrative, it only solidified Rebecca's decision to cut ties with her. Mullen's attempt to turn their family drama into a contest, using her perceived superiority to manipulate others, made Rebecca realize that her sister was still the same insecure person she had always been. But this time, Rebecca wasn't affected by Mullen's tactics. Instead, she found humor in how transparent Mullen's manipulation was. Rebecca and her husband, now closer than ever, simply ignored Mullen's attempts and laughed about it, showing how much their bond had strengthened over the years. As the family drama unfolded, Rebecca finally understood that true family support was not about maintaining an image, but about standing by each other through thick and thin. With her husband by her side, she found peace in the fact that she no longer had to prove herself to anyone, least of all her family. The realization that she didn't need her parents' approval to feel valued was the most important lesson she could have learned. Now, as Rebecca looks toward the future, she no longer feels the pressure to live up to anyone's expectations but her own. She's free to embrace her true self, without the constant weight of comparison or the need for validation. And while the family drama continues, Rebecca is focused on creating her own happiness, proving that real success comes from within, not from the approval of others. In today's world, there are stories that resonate deeply because they challenge our understanding of family dynamics, personal growth, and the pursuit of true happiness. The journey of this individual, who bravely walked away from a life filled with expectations, is a story that anyone, particularly those who have struggled with family pressure and personal validation, can relate to. This is the story of Rebecca, a woman who, despite having the world stacked against her in the form of parental favoritism and sibling rivalry, found strength in asserting her own path and creating the life she truly wanted. From a young age, Rebecca was placed in a situation where her worth was measured against her sister's success. Mullen, her older sister, was the golden child, talented, beautiful, and effortlessly excelling in every aspect of life. As a child, Mullen dominated school competitions, class leadership positions, and later career success. Her parents seemed to be completely captivated by Mullen's every move. In contrast, Rebecca, although successful in her own right, never seemed to live up to her parents' ideal. They made comparisons about her weight, appearance, and career choices, and even though Rebecca was making significant strides in her own field, computer science, she never seemed to receive the same amount of attention or praise. No matter how much effort she put into her accomplishments, it was never enough to garner her parents' approval. Despite all the love and admiration poured into Mullen, Rebecca refused to let herself be defined by her family's expectations. After years of trying and failing to meet their standards, she finally chose to focus on what mattered to her. She found her own identity outside of the suffocating grip of her family's perfectionism. She embraced her achievements, built meaningful relationships, and pursued her career on her own terms. Through her perseverance, she learned that she could find her own happiness, even if it meant not receiving validation from her parents. However, the moment that would change everything came when Rebecca got engaged. Unlike Mullen, who had always been the center of attention, Rebecca's engagement was met with indifference from her parents. They were cold, dismissive, and unwilling to support her in the way one would expect from loving parents. When Rebecca invited them to the wedding, there was no RSVP, and their excuses for not attending were vague and hurtful. It was clear that her wedding, a celebration of love, was overshadowed by the fact that she had married before her perfect sister Mullen. The day of Rebecca's wedding was beautiful, yet the absence of her parents was keenly felt. The empty seats in the front row were a painful reminder of the emotional distance she had been forced to accept from her own family. Her mother later tried to gaslight Rebecca, claiming she hadn't received the invitations, despite the fact that Rebecca had sent both physical and electronic ones. This emotional manipulation was a tactic Rebecca had seen before, but it only served to deepen the rift between her and her parents. As Rebecca tried to make sense of her parents' behavior, she began to see the larger pattern. They had always been more concerned with upholding their ideal family image than nurturing their relationship with her. Even though she had achieved so much on her own, it was never enough to surpass Mullen in their eyes. Rebecca realized that for years, she had been striving to be something she wasn't, a perfect daughter in their eyes, and that this need for approval was weighing her down. The harsh truth was her family would never see her as enough. After the wedding, Rebecca's confrontations with her parents revealed even more troubling dynamics. Instead of accepting responsibility for their actions, her parents accused her of being the problem, claiming she was simply jealous of Mullen's upcoming wedding. They refused to acknowledge the years of favoritism, emotional neglect, and the damage it had caused her. Despite their efforts to manipulate the situation, Rebecca finally had the courage to confront them about how they had made her feel all these years. For the first time, she expressed her hurt and frustration openly and without reservation. Yet, her parents' response was to blame her for playing the victim. What happened next was nothing short of liberating. Rebecca realized that she had been living in the shadow of their expectations for far too long. She no longer needed their approval. She wasn't going to bend to their demands or seek their validation anymore. Rebecca's husband supported her through this realization, and together, they built a life based on mutual respect and love, free from the toxicity of her family's expectations. Mullen, seeing Rebecca's newfound strength, attempted to intervene in the family drama by sending Rebecca's husband a string of condescending and manipulative messages, trying to use him as a pawn to control Rebecca. However, this backfired, as her husband saw through Mullen's tactics and laughed at her attempts. The more Mullen tried to manipulate the situation, the more it became clear to Rebecca that her sister was still the same insecure individual she had always been, using others to maintain her own sense of superiority. Ultimately, the saga of Rebecca and her family is a reminder that true success is not defined by external achievements or the approval of others. It is defined by the ability to stand up for oneself, to be true to who you are, and to create a life that brings you genuine happiness. Rebecca's journey shows us that sometimes, the best way to deal with toxic family dynamics is not by engaging in the drama, but by simply stepping away, letting go of the past, and choosing to move forward with the people who truly value you. Rebecca's story is one of growth, self-empowerment, and the realization that family is not about upholding facades or living up to impossible standards. It's about love, support, and respect. As she continues to move forward, she knows that the most important thing is no longer seeking her parents' approval, but finding peace within herself and her own relationships. In today's world, we are often confronted with stories that test our perceptions of success, family dynamics, and the strength it takes to overcome personal and emotional adversity. One such story is that of a young woman, raised in an environment where her worth was always compared to the achievements of her older sister. The journey of Rebecca, a woman who was constantly overshadowed by her sister Mullen, is a powerful reminder of how far one can come when they stop seeking validation from others and begin to live life on their own terms. From the very beginning, Rebecca's relationship with her parents was fraught with comparisons to her sister. Mullen was the shining star of the family, excelling at everything she did, from school competitions to landing a job as a senior executive at just 30 years old. Her accomplishments were celebrated at every turn, while Rebecca, though successful in her own right, was often overlooked. Her parents, particularly her mother, made constant remarks about her appearance, signing her up for weight loss classes and criticizing her body type. Despite these hurtful comments, Rebecca tried for years to gain her parents' approval, even attempting to model and joining clubs they recommended. But nothing was ever enough. She had become the second daughter, and in the eyes of her parents, Mullen would always be the star. It wasn't until Rebecca reached her mid-20s that she realized she could no longer keep fighting for something that was never going to happen. She stopped trying to impress her parents and instead focused on building her own life, professionally and personally. She pursued a career in software development, a profession that was respectable, but didn't come with the fanfare or admiration her sister received. It was a quiet achievement, but one that Rebecca could be proud of. Over time, Rebecca began to detach emotionally from her parents. She knew they would always be obsessed with their image, always boasting about Mullen's latest success, and for her own peace of mind, she kept her interactions with them superficial. When Rebecca got engaged, her parents' reaction was telling. There was no joy, no excitement, just indifference. Her mother didn't offer to help with wedding preparations, and instead made rude comments about Rebecca's appearance. It was a pattern Rebecca had come to expect. When the day of her wedding arrived, her parents were absent, leaving the front row empty and the father-daughter dance a painful reminder of the emotional distance that had grown between them. Despite this, Rebecca's wedding day was still beautiful, filled with love and the presence of her in-laws, who treated her with the support and care she had always craved. In the days that followed, Rebecca's parents tried to gaslight her, claiming they never received the wedding invitations, despite her records proving otherwise. They even accused her of purposely excluding them, making her the villain in the story. But this was nothing new. Her parents had always manipulated the narrative to make themselves look like the victims. It was then that Rebecca realized the depth of the emotional manipulation she had endured her entire life. She had spent years trying to meet their expectations, only to discover that nothing she did would ever be enough. The turning point came when Rebecca decided to confront her parents directly about their actions. Instead of defending herself as she had done in the past, she calmly and assertively expressed the hurt she had felt over the years. She told them about the times when her accomplishments were overshadowed by Mullen's successes, about how her wedding was dismissed, and how her mother had always made her feel inadequate. Her parents' response was defensive and dismissive, claiming that she was being unfair, and that she had never communicated her feelings properly. They blamed her for playing the victim and accused her of trying to ruin Mullen's wedding. Despite their inability to take responsibility for their actions, this conversation was a significant moment for Rebecca. For the first time, she expressed her truth without fear or guilt. She no longer cared about their approval. The emotional burden she had carried for so long was starting to lift. As her husband supported her through this process, Rebecca realized that true happiness doesn't come from pleasing others, it comes from being true to oneself. The family drama continued to unfold as Mullen became involved, trying to manipulate Rebecca's husband into siding with her. Mullen's attempts to control the narrative backfired, revealing the toxic dynamics that had plagued the family for years. Rebecca's husband, instead of becoming embroiled in the drama, simply responded with kindness and clarity, reinforcing the boundaries they had established. This response was a turning point for Rebecca, who realized that the best way to deal with manipulative behavior was not to engage, but to stand firm in her own truth. In the end, Rebecca's story is one of personal growth and empowerment. It's about realizing that family isn't about adhering to an idealized image, but about love, support, and respect. Rebecca found that the most important thing was not winning her parents' approval, but learning to accept herself and the life she had created with her husband. The family's facade eventually began to crumble as their attempts to manipulate the narrative were exposed. The truth, as it always does, came to light, and with it came the freedom that Rebecca had been searching for. For the first time in her life, she was free from the toxic need to impress those who had never truly seen her for who she was. In the world of family dynamics, there are few things more emotionally taxing than living in the shadow of a sibling who seems to have it all. This is the story of a woman named Rebecca, whose life was shaped by the constant comparison to her older sister, Mullen. While Mullen excelled in everything she did, Rebecca struggled for recognition, even in her own home. The pressure to meet her parents' high expectations and constantly chase their approval left Rebecca feeling invisible and emotionally exhausted. Mullen, from an early age, was the family's golden child. Her achievements were celebrated loudly and often, from winning every academic award to becoming a successful senior executive at just 30 years old. In contrast, Rebecca, though successful in her own right as a software developer, never garnered the same attention or praise. Instead, she faced harsh comments from her mother about her appearance, with constant comparisons to Mullen. Her mother enrolled her in weight loss classes, pointed out how much thinner Mullen was, and even went so far as to suggest that Rebecca could look as beautiful as her sister if she just worked harder. Despite these remarks, Rebecca continued to try to gain her parents' approval, even pursuing paths like modeling, which were of little interest to her, just to meet their expectations. Yet, no matter how much she achieved, it was never enough. Eventually, Rebecca stopped trying to win her parents' favor. She realized that her efforts were futile, and that her worth was never going to be acknowledged in the way Mullen's was. She focused on building a life on her own terms. She found a career in software development, a job that was fulfilling and respectable, but not one that would ever make her parents boast at family gatherings. She worked hard to develop her skills, and her life started to improve when she embraced her independence. However, when Rebecca got engaged, her parents' response once again confirmed her worst fears. They barely acknowledged her engagement, offering no congratulations or excitement. Instead, her mother made critical remarks about Rebecca's appearance, and even questioned if she was ready for marriage. It was clear that Rebecca's wedding, like everything else in her life, was being overshadowed by Mullen. On her wedding day, the absence of her parents was keenly felt. The front row seats at the ceremony were empty, and there was no father-daughter dance, a painful reminder of the emotional rift that had always existed between them. The situation took a darker turn when Rebecca's parents, after the wedding, tried to gaslight her, claiming that they had never received invitations to the event. This was a blatant lie, as Rebecca had sent both digital and physical invitations. When Rebecca confronted her parents about their absence, they turned the blame back on her, accusing her of trying to make them look bad. This manipulation was nothing new. Her parents had always been experts at twisting the truth and turning the situation around to make themselves appear as the victims. Despite the emotional toll this took on Rebecca, she realized that the best course of action was to stop seeking her parents' approval altogether. She finally confronted them directly, expressing her hurt and frustration at how they had always favored Mullen and dismissed her accomplishments. Her parents' response, however, was not one of understanding or remorse. They continued to deflect, accusing her of being insecure and selfish. For the first time, Rebecca didn't try to defend herself. She simply spoke her truth. It was a turning point in her life, marking the end of years of emotional manipulation. Rebecca's story is one of personal growth and resilience. It's a reminder that the path to self-acceptance often involves letting go of the need for approval from those who refuse to see our worth. By finally standing up for herself, Rebecca found the peace she had long been searching for. She learned that real success is not about impressing others, but about building a life that is true to who you are. The family drama and manipulation were no longer her burden to carry. Instead, Rebecca chose to focus on her own happiness, free from the toxic dynamics of her past. Rebecca's journey is a powerful story of self-realization, emotional independence, and breaking free from the toxic dynamics that had defined her relationship with her family for years. For most of her life, Rebecca lived in the shadow of her older sister, Mullen, who was constantly praised by their parents for her beauty, achievements, and success. Mullen's talents seemed endless, and the spotlight was always on her. As a result, Rebecca's accomplishments were often overlooked, and she was subjected to constant comparisons and harsh criticisms, especially from her mother. These comparisons made Rebecca feel invisible and unimportant, no matter what she achieved. Growing up, Rebecca tried everything to gain her parents' approval. She pursued hobbies and interests they encouraged, even ones she had no interest in, such as modeling, just to be seen and acknowledged. But no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. Her mother often made critical remarks about Rebecca's appearance, constantly pointing out how Mullen was the better-looking daughter. Despite the painful remarks, Rebecca continued to strive for acceptance, even though she began to realize that her worth was never going to be acknowledged the way Mullen's was. She finally stopped trying to impress them and focused on building her own life, independent of their expectations. As Rebecca moved into adulthood, she found happiness and success on her own terms. She found a career in software development, and worked hard to make a name for herself. However, when she got engaged, Rebecca hoped for a different reaction from her parents. Unfortunately, she was met with cold indifference. Her parents barely congratulated her, and her mother even made critical comments about her engagement and appearance. When it came time for Rebecca's wedding, their absence was painfully evident. Her parents did not attend, leaving empty seats at the ceremony, and there was no father-daughter dance. The emotional toll was heavy, but Rebecca carried on, supported by her loving in-laws. Later, when Rebecca tried to confront her parents about their absence, they gaslit her, claiming they had never received the invitations. This denial of the truth was just another form of manipulation that Rebecca had grown accustomed to over the years. It was clear that their absence at her wedding was less about any logistical issue and more about the fact that Mullen, their perfect daughter, had not gotten married first. Her parents' manipulative behavior reached new heights, but Rebecca realized that it was time to stop defending herself. In a moment of clarity, Rebecca confronted her parents, expressing her hurt and frustration. For the first time, she didn't seek to gain their approval or make them understand her feelings. Instead, she spoke the truth about how they had always favored Mullen and dismissed her accomplishments. Their response, however, was not one of understanding but of deflection and blame. Still, Rebecca felt a sense of liberation. She no longer needed their approval to feel valuable. Rebecca's story is a reminder that true happiness comes from accepting who we are and letting go of the toxic expectations and relationships that hold us back. It is about finding the strength to stop seeking validation from others, especially those who are incapable of giving it. Instead, it's about learning to build our own lives, filled with people who respect and appreciate us for who we truly are. For years, I struggled with the painful feeling of not measuring up to my family's expectations. Despite all my hard work and achievements, it seemed like nothing was ever enough. My sister Mullen always stole the spotlight, excelling in everything she touched. Growing up, I was constantly compared to she was the ideal daughter, the one who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was just the second daughter, always in her shadow. It was hard not to feel like I was fighting a losing battle. I graduated from college with a degree in computer science, a field I was passionate about, but my parents hardly acknowledged it. They didn't attend my graduation, while they threw a lavish party for Mullen's first modeling gig. Despite their lack of support, I kept pushing forward, trying to build my life on my own terms. I eventually met someone who saw me for who I truly was, not in comparison to my sister. He was kind, understanding, and the first person to make me feel like I was enough just as I was. After a few years of dating, we got engaged. The moment I shared the news with my parents, I was hoping for excitement and support, but instead, I was met with silence. They seemed more concerned with the fact that I got married before Mullen, their perfect daughter. My wedding day came and went, and my parents didn't even bother to show up. It was a painful experience, but I finally understood that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for them. As time passed, I stopped trying to earn their approval. Instead, I focused on building a life with my husband, who truly supported me. Eventually, the truth became clear: I would never be able to change how my parents treated me. And that realization, while painful, was liberating. It allowed me to focus on my happiness, not theirs. Over time, my parents' facade of the perfect family began to crumble. The truth about their favoritism and the way they manipulated situations became apparent. Even my sister, who had once been the golden child, became the target of their unrealistic expectations. I stopped caring about their approval. I no longer had to play the role of the perfect daughter or fit into their mold. The most important lesson I learned through this journey was that real family support comes from unconditional love and respect, not from comparisons or expectations. It's not about meeting someone else's standards. It's about being true to yourself. While my relationship with my parents will never be what I had hoped for, I found peace in knowing I am enough just as I am. I no longer strive to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me. And I've learned that true happiness comes from accepting myself, imperfections and all. Rebecca's journey offers profound lessons on the importance of self-worth and the power of emotional independence. Throughout her life, she sought approval from her parents, constantly feeling overlooked in favor of her sister's achievements. However, as time passed, Rebecca came to understand that true happiness does not come from seeking validation from others, even those closest to us. The story emphasizes the importance of recognizing when relationships are holding us back and learning to let go of toxic patterns. For older individuals, it's a reminder that life is about finding peace within oneself, not conforming to others' expectations. No matter the age, it is never too late to focus on personal growth and surround oneself with people who truly value us. True success lies not in outward accomplishments, but in living authentically and maintaining healthy, supportive relationships. The story teaches that emotional freedom comes from acknowledging our feelings, letting go of resentment, and building the life we deserve based on our own terms, rather than striving to meet unrealistic family or societal standards. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this incredible Reddit story. If you found it inspiring, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Silent Wars so you won't miss out on our future stories. We appreciate your support, and we'll be back with more content that's sure to make you think. See you in the next video.